Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's MZ webinar. My name is Anthony Horn from MZ, and I'm really pleased to be joined on today's webinar by Michael Lemin from NCFE. Today, we're going to talk about the UK further education sector, particularly in the context of the current COVID period, and how, as a sector, it can play a really crucial role in leading local labour markets through the coming months. Just one quick announcement: if you do have any questions as we go, please type them into the questions box on your control panel, and I'll either get to them at the end of the slides, or if more relevant, I'll reach out to you directly afterwards. So then, there are a number of things that we're going to run through today. Firstly, after a very quick introduction to MZ, I'll hand over to Michael, who will give us his take on the national policy environment. Then I'll talk about some of the operational opportunities that have emerged for FE, with a reminder of the challenging labour market conditions under which the sector and we all are currently operating. That will lead us onto a section about locality. So firstly, why data on local labour markets and the conditions they are experiencing is really crucial for FE providers to respond most effectively. And then to kind of join with that, I'll finally touch on how providers can and should really shout about how important they are, how important you are to local communities and local economies. So before we get on to those main agenda points, then just a very quick introduction to MZ for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We are a global labour market data firm headquartered in the US with operations in a number of countries, including here in the UK, as well as Canada, Australia and other countries. And our very focused mission, as you can see on screen, is to spend our time investing in solid, reliable labour market data, but then more importantly, providing that to the outside world so that you can make more informed decisions that help your business and ultimately then help individuals, educators and businesses all connect together. And in connecting those audiences, we're seeing skills increasingly being that central element that glues and brings those various audiences together. So that's my introduction over and done with. On to the kind of main content of today's session, and to begin with, I'm delighted to introduce Michael Lemin, who is Senior Policy Specialist at NCFE, who's going to give us an overview of the national policy environment. So Michael, it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. So I wanted to really focus on the FE white paper, which is the real big ticket in town at the moment. It's the focus of this government really, and over the next few years. So I guess to start with, I should explain what is a white paper. A white paper essentially is a government document that sets out their proposals for what will become future legislation. So it's a kind of vision really for how the government want to take further education over the next few years. Typically that will be consulted on and then followed by a bill which will actually lay the legislation down. So I think it's fair to say that there is a real need for a white paper at the moment, and particularly COVID has really shone a light on some of the weaknesses in the current system, and maybe accelerated some of the trends that we'd already seen before the virus rose. We're expecting it in the autumn. So, and anyone who works in policy will know that the autumn for government can run right up to December. I've heard lots of different rumours about when that might come out. Looking at what else is going on, there's a comprehensive spending review later in the autumn as well. It may be that the Chancellor wants to time the release of the white paper alongside that comprehensive spending review. It's too early to know really, but it could land any time from now up until December, so we'll certainly be looking out for that. And the Education Select Committee ran a session on this morning, so you know, if you look in the trade press, there'll be some good write-ups of what was said there and then as well. So what do we know about it so far? Well, the Secretary of State, Gavin Williamson, gave a speech on the 9th of July, and there's a screenshot of Gavin on the screen there, giving that speech. And within that, he gave us some real clues as to what might be in the white paper. We know that he's looking for a world-class further education system, and as I've said before, it probably needs to be very revolutionary in its approach. So if we go on the next slide and look at you know, some of the things that were said in that speech. Those of us who've worked in the sector for a long time will have heard the German-style education system quite a lot, and it is, you know, much lauded, and you know, it's an ambition to have a vocational system that is as strong as the German system. And I think looking at the current system that we've got in the direction of travel, certainly over the last few years, we've taken a lot of steps towards having a system that certainly looks very much like the German system, with, you know, apprenticeship standards at the heart of everything. Some of the more difficult things really is to change the cultural aspects of that. I think part of the challenge really is that the German system has been largely left alone for a long time. If we use the example of GCSEs and A levels in this country, really, you know, since the 70s, that's been a consistent brand, if you want to call it a brand. They've actually changed quite a lot in that time, but you know, the nature of GCSEs and A levels have remained relatively consistent. What that's meant is that, you know, now we've got people who you know, come through that system. Their parents have done it, their employers themselves have done it. It's a well understood system. They understand what an A level or a GCSE means and what goes into that. Whereas the vocational system is being largely reformed time and time again. So some of that currency is lost. Employers don't necessarily understand some of those new programs, and some of the value is lost in that as well. It's fair to say that the Germans certainly value their system more. There's a lot more prestige associated with that vocational route, and part of that is that stability in policy. And this is part of the challenge for the government really, is that, you know, that we do need to reform it. We know that it's not perfect as it is. But every time we change it, it kind of, you know, it's going to take some time to bed in. And, you know, in an ideal world, we'll be able to come up with something that really lasts the test of time, and, you know, it's tweaked over decades rather than completely reformed again as well. I think the German labour market is very different to the UK's as well, and that's another part of the challenge is, you know, the German system very much lends itself towards that apprenticeship approach. And like I say, I think we need to be very, very careful of trying to transplant another country's education system like for like, because there are going to be cultural and other differences that make it very, very difficult to do that. But it does give us a good idea of the direction of travel, and some of the other things he says in the speech go on to you know, to show us how that would be aligned. So as I've already said, that alignment to the high quality employer-led apprenticeship standards is very much you know, aligned with that German approach as well. And we've seen this with T-levels. So, you know, if T-levels, the content of a T-level program essentially mirrors that of the apprenticeship standards that T-level route would cover. And, you know, the idea is that employers have been asked to come together and design the content of those standards so that we know that they're imparting the skills that people will need to be able to go and do that job effectively in the workplace. So it then therefore follows that other qualifications would use those competencies and skills as part of those standards to actually produce the qualification as part of that. And that's very much what the T-level looks like at the moment. And as Gavin said in the speech, you know, the government are going to be looking to place standards at the heart of the whole technical education system. The early indications are for the level 4 and 5 higher technical qualifications review that they will very much be looking to align any new qualification at level 4 and 5 with the existing level 4 and 5 apprenticeship standards. If and when a qualification that's submitted by an award organisation such as NCFE, then that would receive a kite mark, and our understanding at the moment is that a kite marked level 4 or 5 qualification, i.e. one that is very much matched to those high quality employer-led standards, would attract either a better rate of funding or more favourable student finance and some of the other qualifications there. So that seems to be the direction of travel, and it follows on some of the initial work that's been done on T-levels there. The second point on the screen there is colleges playing a leading role in developing skills in their areas, and I think this is really front and centre of the speech. If you look at that speech, there's a transcript. The word college appears numerous times, and I'm not sure there was much mention at all of independent training providers. So the indications are that the government really want to place colleges at the heart of their communities, recognising that, as it says on the screen there, the local economic need. So really being a sort of supply organisation to the skills that are needed in their local areas. And what I really hope comes as part of this is a real growth in adult learning as part of this. We've seen a real decline in adult learning over the last few years. And I think colleges could play a real big part there if they're backed in this as well. So it looks like colleges are going to potentially be the winners at this, whereas training providers might have a bit more of a difficult time with it. And we've seen things like the subcontracting changes as well, making things a little bit more difficult for providers in that landscape as it stands at the moment. The other bit about higher technicals, which is very important, is I think it is actually, we have very, very small numbers, certainly by international comparisons, of people learning at level 4 and 5. I think one of the unintended consequences of the 50% target for everybody to go to higher education has been that a lot of people reach level 3 and then jump immediately to level 6. But in our vocational system, lots and lots of learners get to level 3 and then they go straight into work. So we don't have a lot of people following on, certainly from 18 years old, straight into a level 4 or 5 higher technical qualification. That's almost non-existent at the moment. A lot of the level 4 and 5 activity at the moment is things like access to HE and HNDs, HNCs, but the numbers are very, very low by international comparisons. So the government really need a plan to reverse that decline. So one of the things in the speech was that they would be dropping the 50% target for people going to university, and I think that's we need to be very mindful that we're not pitting higher education and further education against each other. It's not a zero-sum game. What the country needs is valid options both ways, really. We need to get the right people into the right qualifications and the right sectors to get them into a job. In fact, one of the things that Gavin said in the speech was the purpose of education is to give people the skills they need to go and get a job. Now, whatever we think about that, as a definition of the purpose of education, is very, very helpful in getting us to think about how the government is framing this challenge. And I think we do have a duty, particularly with young people, to give them the right skills they need to go out and get that job. And part of that puzzle is, careers advice, but another part is really to create a good pathway into higher technical education. I think one of the issues really is around maintenance at level 4 and 5. We need to make sure that people, if they're studying full time at level 4 and 5, are able to, take a maintenance loan or even a maintenance grant, some form of support, even a benefit waiver, if that's what it takes to allow them to put food on the table while they study. And we don't know much more about the government's ambition, which mode of study they want this to be. Is this going to be part-time? Is this going to be full-time? What's the target age group? Is this 19 plus? Is this 19 to 24-year-olds? Is it 25 plus? And the more we know about that, the more we'll be able to, as a sector, get behind this reform and really back it and drive those numbers up. So, I'm quite hopeful that if the government get this right, we could really see a big rise in level 4 and 5 technical education. And that could really be key to driving the economy forward and accelerating our recovery from the economic shock of COVID-19. And I thought this was a really interesting line as well about opening up more flexible ways of studying and better support for modular learning. I think with regards to modular learning, COVID-19 has really shone light over this focus on end assessment as a sort of one size fits all in many aspects of education policy, because we've ended up in a situation which I'm sure everybody knows about. The predicted centre assessed grades was problematic, and more modular learning on courses may have been a safer bet for predicting some of those grades. This concept of valid mocks and stuff. So I think the government are rightly looking at this again and seeing how modular learning could form a part of the strategy going forward, because I think it's a lot more resistant to shocks like we've had in the wake of coronavirus. And the flexible ways of studying as well. We've seen in the wake of COVID the likes of remote assessment for EPA in apprenticeships, which has been really positive. And I think we've got a lot of the technology there. I would argue it's not even really innovation. We're using technology that's existed for a long time, but it's quite exciting that the government are looking at really being open to new approaches, and I think that's only right. We're going to be learning a lot of lessons over what's happened in the last few weeks and months, but it seems to me that the signs have been quite positive on looking at more flexible ways of studying and delivery. So that's a real positive as well. A little bit of a hint on what might happen in colleges as well. So I think it looks to me like there might be some prescriptive measures on what a college board of governors must look like, and as it says there, the governors should be drawn from local communities and businesses. Teaching staff should have experience of working in and with industry. Now, I think for many colleges this would be a laudable ambition, and something that many will already have some of all of this really. But there are challenges in that as well. There's certain industries it's going to be very expensive to tempt somebody out of working at an industry to be working in a college. But this focus on local areas and getting those local communities and businesses on the board of governors, I think, is something colleges can start thinking about right now, because it's certainly something that's coming through the pipeline. And something for the likes of NCFE, the award organisations to think about is that reading between the lines here, the courses that should be delivered would be of the highest quality and tailored to the needs of employees and local communities, which would mean the writings on the wall for qualifications that don't fit the bill there. And of course we would fully support that. The last thing we want to do is to churn out qualifications that don't lead to good outcomes for learners. So again, this is a drive we've seen since the Sainsbury report, a simplified landscape with really clear choices for learners that lead them to good quality outcomes, and that focus on local economies is going to be really, really important in that as well. So we published a paper in July outlining some of the issues that we believe the white paper must address, and as you can see there, we had an excellent array of contributions from a variety of organisations working across the sector. And I think we've been doing these papers for a number of years actually, and MZ actually made 2 contributions to one paper, which is the first time that's ever happened, but we felt that they really had some great insight to bring to the table on that as well. And if you look at the next slide, I'll just touch on some of the issues, because I can see I'm getting near my allocated time here, that the paper outlines. And there's certainly more issues than this to address, but just to give you a flavour of what we believe are some of the key issues that the white paper really should look to address, if it's really going to have the impact that we need it to have. The first thing to say is that we're going to have to work, we can't expect huge amounts of money thrown at us here, because in the wake of COVID, I think it's coming up to £38 billion spent on the furlough scheme alone. There are going to be huge public spending challenges going forward, and I think the Chancellor will be very reluctant to invest significantly. So it's going to be what we're used to in terms of we'll be looking to reform a system without significant additional investment. We've got the challenge of people with longer working lives and a general ageing population, which has implications for health and social care and things like that. Automation changing the face of industries, new jobs becoming jobs of the future, some old jobs being made redundant as machines are able to do that. And the COVID-19 impact on industries, I think, some industries are going to be significantly scarred by this and might never recover to where they were. I'm thinking things like catering and hospitality, travel and tourism, the performing arts, that will have a lot of change in those sectors. So we'll be seeing a lot of people looking to retrain in other industries, and there will be opportunities there, from things like I've already mentioned in health and social care. We are going to have looming mass employment. There was a story in the BBC today about lots of people being potentially made redundant, and the furlough scheme ends at the end of October. It'll be very, I think we're in for a very rough winter, and the OBR have forecasted, the Office of Budget Responsibility, their forecast was 12% unemployment in Q3 of this year. So I think it's going to be a very, very difficult winter for a lot of people there. And education can be a real way to help people recover from this and get into the right jobs. We also looked at low pay and the quality of work. We're keen that people have good, fruitful careers and not just a job where the quality of that work and the pay they receive for it is very, very poor there as well. Mental health issues, I think a really great article by Lucy Thorpe from the Mental Health Foundation in this paper. I would urge you to read it. I learned a lot about mental health, and I think we understand more about this than we ever have. And again, education can really play a really important part in improving mental health outcomes for the whole of the UK. We've got the review of the apprenticeship levy, which has been rumbling on for a while, and I think, again, COVID has really turned that on its head. We thought we might have been heading for a big overspend on that budget. COVID probably means we're heading for an underspend and some of the declining starts there. But I think everyone's got their own ideas on what that should look like. But I think everybody agrees that it probably needs a little bit of a tweak. And then the decline of adult learning, as I said earlier in the presentation, it's concerning somewhat that adult learning is declined by such a significant amount, whilst we understand that automation and longer working lives, things like that, people are going to need to retrain, people are going to need to learn throughout their careers and change industries. So I think it's a significant challenge ahead, but potentially quite exciting, and it's really great that the government are looking at this. I think it's really well timed to have a white paper coming out, and really hope that they get this right, because I think the sector is very much ready to work with the government to improve the sector itself and outcomes for learners across the UK. So I'm going to leave it there and hand back over to Anthony.
Thanks so much, Michael. That's really fascinating stuff, and in fact, some of the items you just touched on there, and some of the items that you covered in the Revolutionary Forces paper around impact on industries and impact on jobs and the potential for looming unemployment is something that I'm going to be covering in later slides today. So that's really helpful as a way of introduction. One quick question from me. You heard you kind of talked there about stuff that Gavin Williamson had said and hinting towards the content of the white paper, and that including things like employers being more in the driving seat and locally specific skills and local need being more important and more recognised through the system. But we've kind of heard that before, haven't we? We've heard kind of various governments seeing that kind of thing over the years that we've all been involved in further education. Do you think things might be different this time? Have you heard anything that might kind of give us comfort that there's actually going to be some meat on the bones of that kind of comment?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question. I actually do think it's going to be different this time, and I feel like there's been some significant steps towards that already. So if you take the new Ofsted arrangements, for example, Ofsted are going to be, part of their assessment of any centre will be looking at outcomes and destination of learners. So the colleges need to be mindful when they're making curriculum choices that they're not, over delivering a course where there's not really the jobs available in the local area. Thinking back to that, what I said earlier about the purpose, as the government see it, of education is to give people the skills they need to get into jobs. I think there's going to be a real focus on outcomes in local areas. And I think what they're going to be doing is trusting institutions to to understand their own local areas through the relationships, through the local labour market information, to really make those decisions locally. There's also going to be a devolution white paper that's expected at some point as well. How much the post-16 white paper and the devolution white paper will actually speak to each other, I'm not really sure at this stage. But again, one of the other positive steps that's happened in the last few years is that some of the combined authority areas have actually got control of their local commission of the adult education budget. So again, the government are starting to trust local areas to make those decisions, and I think what the government will really be looking for, is that real locally tailored solutions. So I am optimistic. I've been bitten in the past for being too optimistic, but I think this time does feel a little bit different. And I think part of the reason for that feeling a little bit different is I think local areas are really buying into this idea now and recognizing that they can do things better, and the confidence of institutions is really rising to be able to do this because of working with institutions like MZ, to be able to make those decisions.
Thanks, Michael. Really appreciate getting your expert input here, and I'm sure we're all keenly anticipating both the FE white paper and ongoing funding and other policy announcements specific to FE. But let's all keep our fingers crossed that things are moving in that positive direction. Indeed, on that note, let's now remind ourselves of the operational landscape in which we find ourselves operating right now. Firstly, we all know about, and we've all heard about, the plan for jobs, which the government announced earlier in the summer, and the various initiatives that have emerged or have been associated with that. Things like traineeships, which of course they've been around for 7 or 8 years now, but were given another push by the Chancellor in recent weeks and months. We've seen sector-based academies pushed, so the notion of 6 weeks pre-employment training with the work placement and a guaranteed interview with an employer. Then kind of more recently, we've seen some more detail behind the Kickstart scheme, so financially incentivizing employers to offer placements and jobs. So there's loads of things floating around, and that's just 3. There's various other new initiatives, and as well as the existing initiatives like apprenticeships. We can all remember them being the only issue in town not long ago. So they all exist in the kind of same ecosystem, which I think it's not necessarily the easiest puzzle for providers to navigate, but they do exist. And that, of course, is all set within the context of a labour market which has pretty much fallen off a cliff. It will be difficult enough to navigate all of those various initiatives if things were all kind of fine and dandy, but they're not. So that kind of doubly kind of impacts on providers as well as employees and individuals trying to work out how to best upskill and navigate themselves through the next period of months. But I'd probably suggest that makes it even more important for FE providers to take the lead on behalf of their local labour market and communities, and really get into the detail of the data, into the detail of what's going on in their local area, so they can be best informed to help employees and individuals navigate themselves through. So just some highlights of what's going on at a national level to begin with here, just to kind of give an idea of the magnitude of the challenges that we know we're facing. What these 2 charts on screen show is how employer job posting activities, so employers taking people on, changed from the beginning of the lockdown period. The chart at the top, so the green lines, simply shows the overall volume of active job postings across the UK from the beginning of March this year through to the last week of August. And the vertical black line near the top left-hand side of the green bars there, that's when lockdown kicked in. From that period, we see really a steady fall in overall job postings. About a quarter of all job postings from employers disappeared within a month. which is something that's really previously been unheard of. And then the chart at the bottom of the screen in purple, this shows only new job ads that have been added into the market over a rolling 7-day period. And this kind of shows a more dramatic shift, because we're just looking here at new postings that have been added, so not postings that employees might have just left running for some time through the period. This is just looking at new stuff, and that really highlights the decline in recruitment activities that kicked in when lockdown started. Again, that's shown by the vertical line towards the left-hand side there. At that period, and just before that period, we were seeing in the region of 200,000 new job ads being posted across the UK each week. Less than a month after lockdown started, you can see that that volume had fallen by basically 2/3, which is huge. Now, thankfully, from that low point, we've seen a general upward drift as parts of the labour market have opened up through into June and beyond, and employers have started operating again and started recruiting people again. But we're still about 40% down on the latest week's postings volume compared with the volumes that we were seeing pre-lockdown. So there's still some way to go. If we then look at that same data, so new job postings over time for all industry sectors across the UK, we can see that the picture has been pretty stark for all industries. So the percentage number on the left-hand side of each mini chart on screen now, that shows the drop from pre-lockdown volumes to the lowest volume of postings. And then the percentage number on the right-hand side of each mini chart shows the change from volumes just prior to lockdown through to the end of August. So what we see for each and every sector here is that they've all declined massively. They all took a massive hit down to their lowest point. And really it's only health and social work that are anywhere near back to the volumes that they were seeing pre-lockdown. So there's some significant distance to travel for pretty much all sectors across the UK when it comes to employers recruiting people. So that's employer job postings then, which is really the best insight into immediate term impacts on employees and industry sectors. And as we've seen there, that's been pretty huge. We've also, of course, had the furlough scheme running. So that hit a peak into July of something in the region of 9 million people being furloughed, which is pretty scary. Now that, of course, has fallen now probably by about a half, as parts of the economy and labour market have started up again, thankfully, over the past couple of months. But the great unknown, of course, is how things are going to pan out once the furlough support scheme actually comes to an end over the next 2 or 3 months, which we're starting to see hints of right now as that scheme begins to wind down. So some early indications already of rising unemployment, and Michael mentioned in his slides some of the stark predictions that have been made out of the OBR of where we might end up later in the year. What we've seen already, as the two charts on screen are showing, is an increase in total claimant count and job seekers allowance claimant counts across the UK this past few months. Now, whilst claimant count and job seekers allowance claimant count isn't a measure of total unemployment, the benefit-based data that we can derive from these counts is actually a good indication of unemployment trend. And that's because the total claimant count data, so the green bars on screen here, counts those that are claiming job seekers allowance plus those that are claiming universal credit who are also required to be looking for work. And then job seekers allowance, the blue bars on screen here, that's a subset of the total claimant count, and it largely counts people who are actively seeking employment and who have been employed in the past 2 or 3 years. So often those that are most closest to re-entering the labour market. And what we can see from the numbers and the bars on screen is really a significant jump in claimants from April onwards to really quite significant volumes. And remember, this has been during the furlough support period. probably indicating that we're going to see much bigger jumps when that furlough scheme comes to an end. So I'd say having an understanding of these volumes, particularly at a local level, is really going to be vital for providers as the months tick by over the next year or so. And really that notion of local insight and a clear, detailed understanding of what's going on in your region or regions where you operate is the number one thing we are discussing with our existing clients in the market right now. And it's really the number one thing that we at MZ are encouraging providers to get to grips with. So I had a really interesting conversation just this past week where a college basically told me that they had previously gotten some pretty decent data from people like the LEP and the local councils in the different localities where they operate, that kind of gave them some really useful insights into what was happening in their local area, and they used some other data, including MZ data alongside that. But the two things had really significantly changed for them over the past few weeks. Firstly, that the data they previously relied on from the LEP and the council and others was now way out of date and was not reflective of the huge changes that we've seen in this past few months. And that secondly, those external organisations like LEPs and councils, they've got so much else going on right now that they aren't really going to be focusing much time or effort in providing more up-to-date data to the college anytime soon. So the college really were kind of supercharging their efforts to get an even better insight into what was happening in their local region, which I think is really important. And I guess the onus really is on the FE sector to get its hands on as much local insight as possible, because dare I say, no one else is going to do it for you. So if I jump back to employer job postings data, which remember gives us that real-time view of what's been going on when it comes to employer activity, we can see on screen here how the devolved nations and the sub-regions of England have trended since lockdown. So how employer recruitment activity has been going on in different regions. Again, the percentage number on the left-hand side of each mini chart shows the drop from pre-lockdown volumes to the lowest volume of postings, and then the percentage number on the right-hand side of each mini chart shows the difference from pre-lockdown volumes to now. And what we see there is just again another stark picture of all regions and all devolved nations being negatively hit by this. 7 of the 12 devolved nations and regions on this slide are still more than 30% down on where they were at pre-lockdown when it comes to employer recruitment activities. So regional and localized labour markets really are still subdued, even though things are getting better, still really subdued. And I'd ask the question, do you have a handle on this picture at a regional and a sub-regional level? And perhaps more importantly, do you have a handle on how it's changing week by week? Because it is changing, and that's, I would suggest, going to be really important for the sector to be able to lead on local recovery. We can then take that analysis a step further by looking at a more localized example. So here on the screen is data for the Cambridge and Peterborough area. And what we see here is the green chart at the top of the screen. That's showing the trend in all overall job postings from just after lockdown to now. We see that dip obviously through the end of March, through April and May. But actually we see that this locality is actually recovering really well, and posting volumes have shot up quite considerably from June onwards, which is really positive. And that's sort of re-emphasized by the chart at the bottom of the screen, which shows the 7-day moving total of new postings in green, and then the expired postings, so the postings that employers have removed from the market, in purple. And the red line then shows the net inflow and outflow of postings. And what we see is, again, the big drop overall in activities through April, but then a steady positive trend upwards from that point and into the kind of positive really from June onwards. So It's actually really quite a positive picture over the recent weeks for Cambridge and Peterborough, which I think is great. Again, I would pose the question: do you have your hands on this kind of data for your local area of operation and your local areas of operation? Because they'll not all be positive; some will be very negative. And I wonder how your areas of interest would look. When we start thinking about those local dynamics and the local differentials in how things are trending, it brings back into focus some of those programs I mentioned earlier on, and probably brings them into a different focus. So for any real chance of success for the likes of sector-based academies or traineeships and placements, and for providers to really kind of play a leading successful part in that, well, that's going to need up-to-date, on-the-ground local insight to best target where some of these opportunities might actually exist, because it's just going to be some sectors that just aren't going to have the bandwidth to cope with any of this, and then some sectors that are probably going to be crying out for some support over the next few weeks and months. And I guess these next few slides just kind of give a hint and an example towards that. So firstly, we had a look in earlier slides at some of the overall aggregate trends when it comes to job postings. So kind of overall, and then at industry sector level, and then at a more sub-regional geography level. But what about specific jobs? What's going on in job terms in different regions, not just at a sector level or a region overall, but the actual specific jobs that employ people in different areas. So we can do that, and we can have a think about the jobs, for example, that have taken the biggest hit, so the biggest decline in employee recruitment activities over the past, say, 3 months. So first of all, 5 jobs that have taken the biggest hit across the southwest, and then we can kind of compare that to somewhere like the northeast, and we can see some similarities, but also some specific differences. So kind of some specific jobs that have really nosedived in different regions. Similarly, if we look at detailed specific jobs that have actually seen the biggest uptick in employee recruitment over, say, the past month, we'll also see differences between different regions and cities and towns, because local labour markets are all very different. So if we see the 5 jobs that have been particularly buoyant across the southwest this past month, it's actually quite a lot of sales stuff in there. We can then do the same thing and look at the 5 jobs that have been really buoyant in the northeast across the past month or so, and again, some significant differences there. So if you're operating in either of those regions, are you aware of that? Do you have plans in place to help support individuals and employers for those jobs that are both struggling, that are seeing the decline in activities, but also those that are seeing increased demand from employers as the weeks go by, and helping individuals to move into those jobs? Because I guess to be able to do that, one thing that's going to be really helpful is understanding specific skills that employers are seeking. So having the aggregate view of what's happening in a region, having an aggregate view of how industry sectors are trending in your region, then understanding how jobs themselves are trending downwards and upwards in your region. That's all really useful. Who are the employers that are recruiting people? And then what are the skills that employers are actually seeking? So we can look at a different region here by way of example. So this time the northwest, and let's think about digital jobs. So what are the specific skills that employers have been seeking in this past month right across the northwest? And I think this data, which is the top 20, the skills most in demand from employers, it's really quite interesting, because what we see here is for these digital jobs, a real mix of very technical or hard skills, whatever we want to call them, that are specific to digital jobs and are often very, very technical, and perhaps, going back to one of Michael's points earlier on, perhaps tending towards the higher technical end of skill training. But also at the same time, there are a number of essential cross-cutting soft skills as well that are really, really important. So it's not just technical skills, it's not just soft skills, it's always that combination of them both, which I think is really fascinating stuff from a labour market understanding perspective. And I'd like to think really interesting to have that job-specific, skills-specific data for providers to get your teeth into also. Now, the final thing I want to talk about today is the importance of FE to its local region or local regions, its importance to local communities, and its importance to labour markets. Through some of those earlier slides, I've tried to challenge the sector a bit to be kind of more proactive in accessing local insight and local data to lead the recovery, and I would always kind of pose that challenge. But at the same time, that's not to say that colleges and providers aren't already incredibly relevant and incredibly important and impactful in your local regions, because it's actually far from it. You absolutely are. Of course, you may well have seen mention of the civic role of colleges in the most recent document coming out of the Commission on the College of the Future, which has contained various contributions talking about how important colleges are to a place, and how colleges and providers can help create and reinforce that sense of place and community. One of the contributors indeed to the Commission has been Angela Fuchs from the Sheffield College, who we've worked with for a number of years very closely. And one of the things we've done with the Sheffield College is to help them measure and articulate the contribution they make to their local community and economy, which is just so important. So the notion being, learners gain more skills through the provision that the college offer, they become more productive. That makes them more productive and thus more valuable to employers. It increases their earning potential, so they start earning and spending more money. Industries and businesses become more productive themselves, which snowballs to mean that more businesses and more people are spending more money and more taxes being generated locally. That all connects together and rolls together to make more economic growth and more economic income on an annual basis. And that's all because of the existence of a college. And of course, don't forget the fact that colleges and providers are huge employers. They're huge employers of people in a region, they're huge spenders in a region. So all of the money that colleges and their workers spend on goods and supplies and the buildings and their operations, then the wages that staff and other businesses then generate, that all flows through local economies. It all supports ongoing spend in other businesses. It helps other businesses to grow and invest. And indeed, I'm sure that this kind of local spending that's generated out of a college has been really crucial to towns and cities and regions in recent months. And I'm sure it's going to be even more vital and helpful now that staff and students are beginning to return to campuses. They're going to be spending more and more money in the coming weeks and months, which is all really important to local economic growth and local kind of community success. So what we were able to do for the Sheffield College was just to reinforce that, to reinforce how important the college is to both its local community and its economy. So because of that additional economic activity that it supports, that we've just seen on previous slides there, it generates additional economic activity each year, which gives actually a very positive financial return on the annual government funding that the college receives. And then through the spending that I mentioned and the fact that lots of former students will continue to be positively contributing to productivity and spend in the region year on year, there's then a significant amount of annual economic activity and income attributable to the college and its historic presence in the Sheffield City region. And that volume of activity and economic income is really significant and really does support the ongoing success of the economy, the labour market, and then of course the people and the communities within which the the college operates. So bringing this all together, then what do I think are the key factors in FE leading your local area through the coming months? You know, the fact of the matter is that FE can and should be a huge asset for local communities, people, employers, and their wider labour market and wider economy over the next year and indeed beyond. As we heard from Michael, there are lots of variables and moving parts, and really the sector keep our fingers crossed that the white paper is going to be helpful. We wait with bated breath for that. But stuff like perhaps the sector being more encouraged and allowed to respond to local needs and local skill and job needs. Let's hope that actually happens and is a very positive thing. As well as that upcoming white paper, there's already various initiatives out there. There's the fact that the colleges are all kind of back in business now and are kind of operating as business as usual or as close to as possible. But it's a pretty messy situation right now. That's very much exacerbated by the labour market conditions we are operating in, which are very, very taxing. But FE can lead the way, I'm sure of it. I'm also positive and optimistic for the sector to do so. I firmly believe that local insight is vital to achieving that. Local labour markets all trend very differently. Different types of jobs and different skills are going to be in demand across different localities as the weeks pass by. And I'd really urge providers to get a grip of that data. And finally, you know, we do need FE to help this recovery and help lead the recovery. But I think that's already coming from a strong starting point. You know, we've heard David Hughes and others from the Association of Colleges and other organisations talk about colleges as anchor institutions in a region. We firmly agree with that, and we want to help colleges and providers evidence how important you are already to your local areas and help you kind of shout about that. So what next then? Well, we at MZ, we're going to continue to provide that localised data through a number of means. So insights via our website, as well as commercial options. Do keep an eye on our website, in particular our blog page, because there's always some really up-to-date, insightful data and written pieces on there. So that's going to kind of help you kind of keep over the aggregate data. Also, as Michael alluded to, NCFE continue to be very active in the policy space. So keep your eye out for the upcoming NCFE paper, which is planned for publication later in the month, which will be fascinating as always. And then our next FE specific webinar is on Tuesday, the 29th of September. It's going to continue on the theme of today's session. We'll actually be introducing in that webinar a brand new consultancy report that we've developed, which is going to quickly give providers an insight into what's going on in your local area, what impacts COVID has had on the regions you serve, the industries and the specific jobs in those localities. So lots of the stuff that I talked about in my slides to give you that highly localized insight that I've been talking about today. So please do join us for that. When you receive the slides from today's session, which you'll receive via email, you'll also see registration details for that webinar. In the meantime, though, please do reach out to me directly if you'd like to chat. We're always on hand at MZ to help and to get you the data and the insight that you need. Finally, I'd like to say a special thanks to Michael Lemin from NCFE for joining me today, and thanks to you all very much for joining and listening.